Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for coming to the first of our autumn season for the Traverse Area Historical Society monthly programs. As we have some visitors today, I'd like to just give a brief overview of what the Society is. We are a nonprofit 501c3. Our mission is to preserve, protect, and present the history of the Grand Traverse region. Our activities include programs such as this, along with historic tours, archive support, and scholarship support for our middle schoolers studying history through the Michigan History Day program. We are also an all-volunteer organization. There are no paid positions. We're governed by a board of directors. And what we are hoping today to do is to just let you know that if you are interested in joining our society, please see me after our wonderful program today. Today's program is on the new Anishinaabe Cultural Markers for the Kchi Wiikwedong or the Grand Traverse area. Our presenter is Dr. Emily Modrall. She has been coordinating this wonderful marker project for moving on to now 5 years and has brought great awareness to the Native American origins of our history here in the region. I'd like you please to welcome Dr. Modrall for this presentation.
Thank you, Stephen. There we go. And thank you all for coming today. I appreciate your time this afternoon and your interest in this project. As Stephen mentioned, this initiative did get started almost 5 years ago, which is hard to believe. At that point, when it was just an idea, I think in the first grant application I wrote, I predicted that it would take about 9 months to finish the project, start soup to nuts, start to end, and I was wrong in the best of ways. Though it was a good thing that it took the time it took to get to the point where we are now, and I'm delighted to think that there may be a phase 2 and beyond after this. So, about 5 years ago, I had already by that point spent years walking and running along the bay on the Tart Trail and passing this white marker that's on the screen, and had wondered about it. And finally, about 5 years ago, got to a point where I thought, I really need to figure out what this thing is. And so I stopped and read the plaque, which says Old Indian Trail, Cadillac to Traverse City. Prior to moving back to this area 11 years ago now, I spent a 15-year career as an archaeologist working almost exclusively in the Mediterranean. So I'd spent that time learning the very old history of other places really intimately, thoroughly, hands in the dirt. And when I saw this plaque, having lived back in this area for a few years already, I was really struck by my own ignorance and sort of embarrassed that, that there was this evidence that something could be known about a past that was hard to see and that hadn't been mentioned much in the years when I was growing up in this area. And so I thought, well, if there's a trail, if there's one trail, there's got to be other trails, and if there are trails, there's a whole history that I know nothing about, and I need to do something about that. And I hoped that other people might want to know something about it too. So I approached some Grand Traverse Band community members with this very broad idea and hope that we could do something that made the history of the Native people of this region more visible. And my hope was that we could do it in a way that was a reflection or a product of the Grand Traverse Band community's perspective, values, interests, priorities. So in other words, I knew from the get-go that it wasn't my job to decide what we were going to do or what it would look like, or if there were words, what they would say. I thought maybe it could be my job to help make sure it happened. And so that's sort of how this project came about and how it played out as well. So the first thing I had to do was educate myself. And that was something I did kind of on my own, with the resources at the library and people I met who were willing to share what they knew. I gave myself the best kind of education I could in the Indigenous history of this area. And when I say history, I'm really talking about prior to the mid 1800s. So prior to the point when non-native people kind of moved into this area with a plan to settle. There, of course, had been non-native people in the Great Lakes region for a long time already because of the fur trade and other trade. But we're really talking about the period just before and during the formation of Michigan as a state. So the first thing I did after I saw this marker, trying to figure out, where it came from, who knew enough to put a marker here, was I tried to figure out its origins, its story, and I was directed to. If this thing has a, yeah, it does. So I was directed to a person named Frank Edowagishik, who is in the blue shirt in this photo. This photo comes from the photo archive here at the library, and there are a bunch more in this series. And above all, I think what these photos tell us is that this marker project really was a group of people who maybe did not ask permission. They had a pickup truck and shovels and a plan and a lot of knowledge and a deep love for the Native history of this area. So Frank organized this project as a project of the sesquicentennial celebration of the state. He ended up on that committee. And as he said, every committee member had to have a project. So his project was to finish marking this trail. The trail had already been marked from Cadillac to Buckley, roughly. And so he took it upon himself and his friends to go from Buckley to Traverse City to finish that marker project. So when I was looking at this marker, number 33, that's the last one. There are 33 markers on this trail. And this is down at the West End Beach here in Traverse City. Number 32 is by the Haggerty building on Cass. If you're going south, it's just before you get to 8th Street. Number 30 is outside the city limits. So 31, 32, and 33 are within Traverse City limits. And then you move out of the city. Anyway, Frank was very generous with his time and his wisdom, not only about his own marker project, but I said to him, well, so what should I do? And he said, find a group of people who want to help you and who know what should be done. And so that was sort of my next step, in addition to, again, like I said, educating myself about this history. The resource that he used and that marker project used and that he suggested I use is this book called the Archaeological Atlas of Michigan. And this library has a copy upstairs in the reference section. And if you are interested in the history of this state, I highly recommend a visit to that book upstairs. It has a page like this for every area of the state. When you get down to the Detroit area, for example, there are red lines everywhere. it's really interesting. So what this guy did, Mr. Hinsdale, he was a professor of archaeology at the University of Michigan. And in the 30s, he set out to gather all the information he could about the native history of the state and to get it down on maps like this. So the lines are trails, the triangles are villages, the circles are burial sites, and then there are, it's hard for me to pick one out from where I'm sitting, or standing rather, but there are black boxes with diagonal lines. I'm not sure if the resolution is good enough for you to pick them out from where you are sitting, but those indicate garden beds, so cultivated areas. And so Hinsdale in the 30s, I suspect, was hurrying to get this down on paper before it was lost. So he used a bunch of different sources for these maps. He used the land surveys that were done when Michigan was being platted to become a state. He used people's stories. He went out and looked at landscapes. He used what archaeological evidence there was, and put these maps together. So I don't think I'm supposed to get too far from this microphone. So I can't move myself around too much, but I believe that the Cadillac to Traverse City Trail is roughly here. Forgive me if I'm off, but there is a roughly north-south trail marked on this map that gets you from Cadillac to West Bay in Traverse City. And you can see all these other trails as well that are marked on this map that kind of relate to the Traverse City region. I put Leelanau County up here too, because I wanted to give us as clear a picture, as big a picture as possible, and also because I think it's important to note that a lot of the trails that are shown on these maps the modern roads follow those trails. So this is basically M22 headed towards Northport. Oh, thank you. Oh, excellent. Okay. Does it work? Yes. Okay. Great. I can move around. Yeah. Okay. So here's Cadillac to Traverse City. And here is more or less M22. And that's not just here that modern roads follow historical trails. You can see that throughout the state, in fact. So again, just sort of so I understood as thorough, as deep history as I could, I went to some of Hinsdale's sources, namely those maps that I referenced, the survey maps. The one I have up here is from Leelanau Township. And I will explain why I used Leelanau Township in a minute. But this, on this map, you can see where this surveyor drew these trails. So this actually says Indian Trail to Carp River. Carp River was the name at that point for the Leland area. And this says Good Harbor, which is funny because that's not what we call Good Harbor, but so this is Omina, more or less. So there was a trail that went from Omina to Leland, and there's a current road that roughly follows that trail. And then you can also see a trail system going up here, again, more or less where M22 runs now. So there are the maps in the surveys, and there are also the notes in the surveys. And some of the surveyors made very thorough notes about the human history of the land that they were walking, and mapping. This guy, Wadsworth, happens to have been one of the people who took good notes about the human history of the land. So he talks about the sugar camps that he was encountering along the shore in particular, where there were maple trees. And he also talks about an old apple orchard here on Omena Point. The reason I used this township rather than Garfield, for example, or East Bay is because they have no notes about the human history. And they did not note trails or camps or villages or burials. And I think the more you look through these surveys, the more you realize that this really just depends on the person doing the work. They got to choose. There's some people who I've heard say that some of these surveyors barely walked any of the land they were mapping, that they sort of did the bare minimum. So they actually may not have even seen these things that appear to be missing from their notes or from their maps. In other cases, maybe they did see them and they chose just not to record it. I don't know, but I guess the point is that the saying goes that the absence of evidence is not evidence of absence when it comes to to these survey maps. So, especially if you think about the survey map with no indication, no notes about Native people here, and then you go back to this map and note how busy the Traverse City area was from other records, then you've got to conclude that these surveyors just kind of skipped that part. We can move on from there. So, in addition to those historical documents, I also did some digging around in the photo archives here, and also through the Leelanau Historical Society and the Omena Historical Society, and noted how much evidence there was at one point that has disappeared now when we look around us in this area for a memory of native land use, native occupation, native history. So the Indian Trail Bridge, the bridge is still there. I'm pretty sure this is Mitchell Creek over on East Bay, but we don't call the bridge that anymore. And the Indian Trail Lodge apparently was over by what? Someone used a restaurant to tell me where this was. Across from the restaurant that is still Mabel's or was Mabel's. No, Fred has a different idea. Oh, farther east. Okay. Mitchell Creek.
I remember the Indian Trail Lodge Motel.
Oh, okay.
The old cabins, then they built a newer one. I'm trying to remember it too. And then all that's been torn down years ago.
It's all gone. Okay. Well, so at some point, Indian trails were well enough known that we were naming bridges and lodges after them, right? But now we don't even see those things. There was also a time when the native language, the Anishinaabe language, Anishinaabe Moan, when some words were part of our communities in a way that they are less so at this point. So the Wiikwedong Club, that name comes from Wiikwedong, or is, a version of Wiikwedong, which is the bay. And that was roughly where the Delamar is that right? Where the bridge is. Close, right, yes. Right, okay. This one came across my radar as a question. The question was, did I know about Kchi Wiikwedong? And I said, no. But I have to believe that this is another use of the native language, that we do not use that as a place name anymore. I think it's on East Bay. It's Indian Woods. Oh, it is on East Bay. Yeah. Great. Okay. Indian Woods is just sort of behind NMC towards East Bay. Yeah, so right at the base of the peninsula. Yeah, okay, well, there, now I know the answer to the question. Great. I learned something. So there still, of course, is evidence if you look around today in 2025 for this very long Native history here. Largely in the form of street names and place names, although, as I said, the Anishinaabe language has largely disappeared outside of names of people. So Indian Trail Boulevard is, again, over in that East Bay region and must preserve the memory of a trail that came through there. There are others. These other examples happen to be from Leelanau County. And with the exception of Arrowhead, so Arrowhead and Indian Beach are self-explanatory. Manitowabi and Wakazoo are people's names, and those both come from, one's from Omina and the other is from Northport. Similarly, Agosatown and Annamanese remember villages, and the fact that those villages were, at least for non-Native people, referred to by the names of people who lived there. You can also find bits and pieces of this. I call it a watermark of Native history. That you do have to look for it, but once you see it, then you see it in a lot of places. So there's also evidence in some of the government records that are still, still used. So much like Indian Woods, we have Indian Village up north of Northport on the west side of the peninsula, and that, in fact, was a location of an Indian village. And then over on Stony Point, you have Nabanaga Shores, which was another site of a village. So these names and these references, they kind of hang on, even if we don't, even if we don't use the term Indian village, if that's just the subdivision name, you can still find these things if you're looking for them. In terms of other sources that I used for my own education, I looked at other work that had been done more recently by historians who know a lot more than I do about the Native history of this region. This map happens to have been put together by a person named Larry Wyckoff, who's done a lot of work on the Native history of this area. And I like this map for many reasons, but one of them is that it shows some of these village sites in terms of land ownership. After land ownership became mandatory, became necessary for people to stay where they wanted to be. And so I just mentioned Naganaba Shores on Stony Point, and so that would be right around this red area, where by around 1860, Native families had chosen to purchase land in order to be allowed to remain there. You can also see very clearly where Pashabi Town is through both land allotment, so the agreement that was made between the tribes and the federal government, and also land purchases. And then you can see, I mentioned that subdivision called Indian Village. That's up here, where land was purchased. I think it's worth noting too, so this red dashed line on Larry's map that goes all the way up the shore and then cuts across right here, just south of what is now Northport, and goes all the way back down. So this was the reserved land, according to the Treaty of 1855, which was made between the tribes in northern Michigan and, again, the federal government. There'd been a previous treaty in 1836 that defined reservations, and then they kind of redid the whole thing in 1855. So in the Treaty of 1836, the reserved land for the local bands was the Old Mission Peninsula. By 1855, they had changed that to constitute almost all of the Leelanau Peninsula. And the allotments were parcels owed to individuals and families according to the terms of this treaty. And then, as I said before, some people had already decided to purchase their land to secure it, and presumably some went ahead and purchased afterwards for whatever reasons they had. I wonder if at this point there are any questions, if I've lost anybody with any part of what I've said. I also want to acknowledge that one of these historians who knows way more than I do about all of this is with us today. That's Vicki. She's sitting right there. So if you have a question that I can't answer, there's a very good chance that Vicki can answer it now or later. Sorry, Vicki, I just put you on the spot. rope you into this too. No? Okay, I'll keep going then. So I include this slide because I think it's helpful to understand that when I was thinking about this project to make Native or Anishinaabe or Indigenous history more visible in our communities in this region, there are all these historical documents that were prepared by people who were not Native, who were basically engaging in systems of organization of some sort, whether it's land ownership or, land plotting. There are many others related to payments. There are censuses. There are all sorts. There are health records, right? There are many ways and places where Native history is written, but it's written by non-Native people because it's part of a program of some sort or a system of organization. I thought it was also, I think this slide is important to include here because this is a statement written by the descendants of the people who those records refer to. So that is history, but this is very current, and this is alive and well, and it is complex and deep, and this is a community that's within our community that is a sovereign nation and that has a language and a perspective that, in my opinion, needed to go hand in hand with this history that we were acknowledging. And this was important to the people, the Grand Traverse Band community members who have been working on this project with me as well, that it not be a project about the past, that it be a project that acknowledged the past, but also the present and the future and the aliveness of these people and what was important to them to represent. So we decided to sort of follow Frank Edouard-Guichic's model of trail marking, but we also decided to do it a little bit differently. So we used this map and we hired a designer who is Oneida from Wisconsin, who he's an architect first and foremost, and he has designed 3D pieces. I don't know if he calls them art or if they are a form of architecture in his mind, but they are big and they're three-dimensional and they're durable. And he also had experience working across a big geography. So we were tackling basically Grand Traverse and Leelanau counties with this project. That was the kind of the scope we had in mind. So he came and looked around. He's from, like I said, he's from Wisconsin, and so he said that this all felt very familiar to him, just the other side of the lake. And these amazing people at New Art Signs here in Traverse City agreed to build the things that Chris drew. So on the left, you see Chris's plan. And this was about as much direction as these guys got. They had to figure out how to make these 3D shapes from this drawing, and they did an incredible job. So this is this is this shape. If you are a design person, you will note quickly that it is turned. So this face is actually the face that you can't see, that's sort of pointing this way on this object. So we move, in other words, we moved the plaque from one side to a different side of the object. So those were the things that got created, the steel objects. Chris designed them to be made out of weathering steel or corten steel, which looks rusty, looks brown, because it does rust. It has a high percentage of copper in it, and something about the composition of that steel means that it rusts, but then it creates its own like protective layer, so it stops rusting. And it lasts for a very long time. It has a life expectancy of about 100 years. Yes? Yes, so this one in particular is down at Kchi Park. And this is a photo of the day last November that it got installed at Kchi Park. And what's that? Yeah, that's the bijou right there. Yes, yeah. And the old well from the zoo is right here. I like this picture because there's a point during the installation of each one of these when one or more people is lying on the ground. And I find it to be very funny. So I made sure to get lying on the ground pictures for all the markers. It's funniest when they're all lying on the ground. So yes, it's made of steel and it'll last a really long time as long as nobody hits it with sidewalk or road salt. Sorry? Safe there, yes, this is a pretty safe spot for it. You can see that it has a pattern on it, and I'll get to some better pictures of the pattern. Yeah, in a couple of slides. The pattern is, that you can see here, those are holes right through the pieces of steel. So it's a hollow form, and the holes, the pattern rather, represents a beadwork pattern. So traditional Native or Anishinaabe beadwork. And the forms themselves, it's too little to read it, but up here it talks about the fact that the forms themselves are meant to look like rocks to symbolize that the native history of this area is as old as the rocks. So I didn't put the Hinsdale map back up here, but we looked at the trail systems and the village sites in this area, and we selected locations for 9 markers that would be on a trail and or at a village, and they all look at water in some way or another. So the Brown Bridge marker was the first one to get installed, and it looks directly out over the river. That location has contemporary significance. One of the voices in our conversation felt very strongly about putting a marker there to honor the leadership of the Grand Traverse Band in the dam removal process on the river. And that was the site of one of the dams, and it was a perfect spot for one of the markers. So we put one there. And then there's a little cluster here in Traverse City, as you can see. There's one at Hannah Park, one at Kchi Park, and one at West End Beach. On the map of the trail systems, you can see that old, quote unquote, old Indian trail from Cadillac roughly follows that route through town. I did originally have permission to put a marker near each of Frank's white markers, so 31, 32, and 33. only 33 got a new marker to go along with the old marker. So our plan was never to remove Frank's markers, but to put a companion marker with the white markers. The trouble with the other two, the two on TAHS, rather, 31 and 32 of the old markers, is that they are way out of formula as far as the streets department goes. So they said, yeah, no way. You can't put a marker anywhere near here. And in fact, those things aren't supposed to be here either, but they promised they wouldn't touch them. So anyway, we had to get a little creative, and that's how we ended up, that's how we ended up with Hannah Park and Clinch Park markers. Moving up the peninsula, we put one in Sutton's Bay. It's on the bay side of the library. If you're up there, it's right next to the little stretch of Tart Trail that runs through the Marina Park up there. And then we put one in Omena. It's at the Omena Beach Park, the little tiny public beach in Omena. There's one there. We put one in Northport, close to the boat launch at their marina, next to the creek that comes in there. And then we put one over at Peterson Park, where Indian Village is, the subdivision that I referenced previously. And we put one in Leland. And that one is at the Library Historical Society building. The words are small, but this line here tells us what each of the plaques talks about. So designing the object was one part of the process. Designing the plaque and deciding on words was a separate piece of this project. So Chris, the wonderful person who designed the object, did not design did not decide on the words, nor did he work on the kind of graphic design of the plaque. The people who worked on this project most consistently and intensively happened to be 3 women, and they are all elders in the Grand Traverse Band community. And they decided that they wanted to use these plaques to relay the 7 grandfather teachings. So these are the grandfather teachings in the words of the grandmothers. They restated them in their own words, in consultation with their own teachers and with other resources. So 7 of the plaques have one teaching each, and then 2, there are 9 total, 2 of them relate to history. So the one at Clinch Park is a history plaque, and the one at Peterson Park is a history plaque. And they are very similar, one to the other. And then each of the other ones is different. And they are fully bilingual with let me see if the next slide, yeah, here. There we go. They're fully bilingual. So the Grand Traverse Band has been very supportive and helpful with this project from the beginning. They offered that their language teachers, who are fluent speakers of Anishinaabe could translate the English text into Anishinaabe-Moan, and the way we decided to present it puts the Anishinaabe-Moan first, at least in terms of the way we traditionally read from left to right. So the Anishinaabe-Moan's on the left and the English is on the right on each of the plaques. And there's a slightly more clear example of one of them. Here's the one at Sutton's Bay looking at water, and the one at Brown Bridge looking at water. What neither of these pictures shows, because they weren't there yet, is that all of the markers have a little QR, a metal QR code attached to the concrete base. So somewhere down here, if you sort of walk all the way around a marker, you'll find a QR code now on each of them. And we did that because, well, for a number of reasons, one of which was accessibility. So when you when your phone connects you via this QR code to the website that goes along with this project, you can hear people read the plaques in both Anishinaabe-Moan and in English. And it also then, once you're on the website, you can see what all the other plaques say as well, in case you maybe don't get to visit all 9 of them. There are 2 shapes. This shape only got used twice. This shape got used 7 times. Each community that we approached with this proposal to put one of these markers in, they got to choose which shape they wanted. And there was a clear favorite. The funny thing is, it doesn't look like it in this picture, but this one is by far the biggest of the markers. This one's at Peterson Park, and it's really big. It's cool. I was glad that someone chose this shape and the kind of extra large version of it. So the municipalities that we approached, and all of them said yes, which was a real honor, actually, were the city of Traverse City, the villages of Suttons Bay and Northport, and Leland and Leelanau townships. So now that these markers are all installed, they are the property of those municipalities. Those municipalities get to take care of them for the rest of the markers' lives. And really the municipalities, they get to make any and all decisions related to these markers. And I know that they will be great stewards of these objects. Well, that's the Northport one. There we go. On a rainy day. Oh, there, you can see a QR code right there. They look like that, little circles. I will leave a couple minutes for questions. I always want to make sure that I thank the very many people and organizations who helped. None of this would have happened without the participation of all of these entities and individuals and more that couldn't fit on this slide. And I first and foremost and explicitly always want to be sure that the Grand Traverse Band of Ottawa and Chippewa Indians knows how integral their role was in this project. The local historical societies have been, wonderful cheerleaders and resources and hosts along the way. And the funders, of course, they made it all happen, really, in the end. There was something I was going to say and I forgot. I wanted to add that to the thanks. Well, anyway, if it comes to me, I'll say it. But it's critical for everybody to know that this project was collaborative in every way, from beginning to end. And I am happy to take any questions that anyone might have about this. I'm going to turn this microphone off. Okay. He said yes. Oh, okay, great.
Is there a new map? Is there a map of these new markers for travel, like a traveler's map for the new?
Oh, yes, there will be soon a new map. There's a really cool map that is kind of an updated, modernized map of the Archaeological Atlas page that is already like in the public domain, but you have to be a sort of GIS mappy type person to know where to find it. It will move to the project website. And then as we speak, a GIS mappy person is making a more usable kind of everyday map of these 9 markers themselves with GPS points. And it will also be on the website. I'd say give me another month and that'll all be on the website. Is there another question?
Yeah. Will your slides be available for researchers?
Will my slides be available for researchers? That's an interesting question. I guess I sort of put the question back to the library. If this is recorded.
On the event, and then people can do it that way.
Yeah, so through the recording of this presentation, the slides will be available. Yes.
Well, of course, one of the things that made Perry Hannah so immortal in people's minds was his on-foot trek from Traverse City to Lansing when he was in Congress. Is that and I assume because he had an Indian guide, that was a Native American trail. Is that path marked anywhere?
So can you hear the question, or do you need me to repeat it? They got it. Okay. So the specific trail that Perry Hannah and his native guide took, it is not marked as such anywhere that I'm aware of. I think we would have to use our best guess to know which of the trails they took. Flipping through slides always makes me feel kind of crazy when I watch it happen, so I apologize. But, you know, we could go back to this map and see if we could figure out, you know, did he take that trail to Cadillac? And then what? What's that? No, well, right, what we call Cadillac now to Mitchell Lake, and then from there, yeah, I guess we would have to, just have to do some guesswork to know specifically, in 1931.
I mean, the original mapping from it.
The surveyors, they were here in the 30s and in the 50s. Yeah.
I'm just because there probably wasn't much of a map between here and Lansing.
Well, you'd have to just piece these all together if you were.
Do it.
Well, there was a trail system throughout the whole state. So, you know, we don't have the best records of it, but people have been moving up and down for hundreds, if not thousands of years. So there would have been a way for them to do it. Yeah.
Markers or memory?
Memory, yeah.
Compass.
Thanks. Oh, yes, a question.
What were the 7 teachings of the grandfather?
The 7 grandfather teachings? Here, let's get back to those. The important stuff here. Oh, they're there. Let me turn this microphone back. So I'm not sure how clear it is from where you're sitting, but the truth, love, bravery, humility, honesty, respect, and wisdom. The teachings focus on each of those. Values is a funny word, but we can use the term values.
Animal that was associated with one too, is that on the?
We didn't use any animal imagery. If you go to the Botanic Gardens here in Traverse City, they have done a project that with beautiful markers in their native plant garden or healing garden. I can't remember exactly what it's called, but it's near the labyrinth. And they did use animal images to go with each of these teachings. And I am not familiar with how that decision got made or the tradition behind that. We decided pretty early on to just use words and kind of let the marker be the image and the sprig of cedar also.
And start to finish again with how many years again did you say it was?
Almost 5. Yeah, not the 9 months I had originally predicted. And there is the possibility that we might do more. People have asked from other parts of what is now sort of the Grand Traverse Band. I think they call it their service area, which sounds very bureaucratic. But, you know, we could go up to Elk Rapids or even kind of the south part of Charlevoix, the Charlevoix area. We could go to Benzie County. There are other parts of Leelanau County that we didn't get to, like Glen Arbor, for example. So we may do a few more, and now I know that it doesn't take 9 months to do that.
Last question online is,
Yes.
what is your doctorate in?
Oh, it is in Mediterranean archaeology. Yeah. Thank you. There you go.
I want to thank Dr. Modrall, who happens also to be a member of our board, for this wonderful presentation. I also want to thank the Traverse Area District Library for hosting us. We could not have these programs without the wonderful partnership with the library. I also want to point out to our next program, which will be on October the 12th. This will be the Society annual meeting, but we will have 1 or 2 speakers, both of whom are the award winners for our middle schoolers in their history program with the Michigan History Day. And they will both be talking, or at least they're invited to speak to everyone who comes, even though it is our annual meeting. All are welcome. And then after our business meeting, we will have a social event where food and games will be provided. Of course, all dealing with history of the local area, and everyone is invited. So thank you very much, and wish you have all a very good day. Thank you.